If anyone wants to learn how to put stiffer valve springs in for a cam swap on an LS engine, specifically, these are $7.99 heads, but this trick will work for typically any LS heads that you need to do valve springs on, so stay tuned. So to start off, this tool actually from the big name companies is anywhere from $100 to $150. I got it off of Amazon for $25. So great tip, good thing to know, so you don't spend money where you don't need to. So we got the spacer right here. And then we took this metal piece and threaded bolt into it. Set that right on top of the spacer. So now I just tighten these bolts down so that way it don't go nowhere. So the way this thing's designed, I actually had it upside down, so this stud was facing too far out, and this little bracket wasn't lining directly up with the valve springs like they are now. So I actually etched a T in the top, so that is something to remember. There was no instructions with this thing, so I kind of had to feel it out by hand. But I tightened these up, and it's about ready to start cranking down the nut on the stud to be able to push the valve springs in. So now I also did want to mention, you can't forget, when you're doing this, you have to put rags underneath the head so that way the valves, because when you put pressure on these springs, the valves are going to want to push through. So if you put a rag and you got it on a firm table, the valves will stay in place. If you're doing this inside of a vehicle with the head still on, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. You're going to have to add air hooked up to the spark plug hole so that way it can keep the valves pushed up so you don't drop valves when you're trying to do this. But it's a lot easier to do it like this with the heads off outside of the vehicle. Alrighty. Now I'm going to take my little magnet here, get the keepers out. Sometimes it's a good idea to smack the valve springs with a mallet to loosen these keepers up, because sometimes they like to stick to the valve. And once you got all your keepers out, you can untighten the nut. You can take your valve springs out. Now you're able to inspect your valves for any damaging bends, anything like that. Make sure they're looking fine. These are looking just fine, so I'm just gonna throw the springs on and get on to the next ones.